Good morning. This is Theresa from Can We Talk. Robin Hensel from Can We Talk, and we're here to see if we can talk. We've got a lot to cover today. Robin's going to start us off with the latest news.
Well, just last night I found something interesting on the League of Minnesota Cities website. This new spot I found is called the City Spot, and its blog. It says the spot for timely news and information for and about Minnesota cities. And this says research question of the week, public hearings and rearranging the furniture is the name of this blog. There are some P's and Q's for public meetings and hearings that can keep these important listening opportunities golden. Members of the public do not have the right to remain at council meetings or public hearings if they are disrupting the proceedings. For example, a Minnesota woman was recently convicted of disorderly conduct after police removed her from a city council meeting for being disruptive. When the woman arrived at a council meeting, she removed a chair from the public gallery, placed it directly in front of the council's bench, and refused requests for her to move back to the public gallery. These rules can keep a meeting running, give opportunity for the public to be heard in a fair manner, and keep the furniture from being a point of contention. This is written by Susan Naughton, Naughton, research attorney with the League of Minnesota Cities. Her contact information, in case anybody would care to comment on this blog, is snaughton, SOSNAUGHTO @lmc.org or 651-281-1232. You might want to comment or call them about the use of your public tax dollars being used to spew out this kind of information. Why this is important is that the city of Little Falls is one of the members of League of Minnesota Cities. Your tax dollars and ours are used to fund this type of thing. And the writer doesn't mention that my illegal arrest is being appealed to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. The writer leaves out the fact that only 4 days prior, where this occurred, 7 others, including the mayor's husband, Kathy Van Risingham, and her mother-in-law, were allowed to sit in that same area. This is written to encourage other cities to wield their power to chill free speech and deny equal rights. And I commented on this blog, and of course it won't be published, I doubt it. I wrote 2 comments stating that exactly what I just said, something to that effect. And it'll be interesting if they do publish it. It's interesting also that at the top of this, or to the side of this blog, it reads, the League of Minnesota Cities is a membership organization dedicated to helping cities throughout Minnesota build quality communities through effective advocacy, expert analysis, trusted guidance, and collective action. The League serves its more than 830 members, of which Little Falls is one, through advocacy, education, and training, policy development, risk management, and other services. So I just found that interesting because, in my opinion, they definitely are encouraging other cities. They're using this example to encourage other cities to do the same type of thing. Should somebody want to exercise their free speech, sit or demand their equal rights, sitting in the same area that others had been present at.
Well, presumably, if the city is intelligent enough to want to look into this in the first place, you'd think they'd look a little bit further than the prejudicial presentation of the body that ended up being the risk manager for Little Falls, which means that it cost them some money to deal with your case.
Well, they're absolutely have spent a lot of money. It's all an attempt to chill free speech and deny our rights in some fashion or another. I found this also just within the last couple of days. Julian Assange was interviewed, and from his interview he states, "It is part of the calculation of power to project power. And one of the ways to project power is to show that you are unaccountable so you don't try to touch us. And why that correlates to the city issue is with the city advisory golf board operating illegally outside of the law that the city council created for more than 27 years. That golf advisory board isn't just a committee, it's a law, it's an ordinance. And the city has been in direct violation of that knowingly for 27 years. Every single city attorney, city administrator, council, mayor, up to president and including the present ones, are all guilty of abusing their power, wielding their power to flout their own laws. It's like a complete slap in the face to all of us. And the biggest factor, folks, that you need to be aware of is that the Golf Advisory Board was required, one of the reasons it was required to meet monthly, and they never met that since 1989, was because it's public funds involved in this. And so if
somebody has to be accountable for those public funds, but if you never meet and you never discuss it and it just somehow, then you're completely unaccountable. It's as
right.
Robin quoted.
Right. It's unbelievable the depths this city will go to wield their power and then try to hide their mischief. And then try to lay the blame on someone like us, exposing their shenanigans.
Their shenanigans, exactly. Well, this isn't even a case of trying to wield power over. It's sort of like trying to get out of responsibility, or so it seems to me. If you're supposed to meet monthly and you just don't, it's not as if that achieves something for you, except that you can stay home and watch TV instead of go to the meeting. And somehow that to me seems even more derelict than the positive moves to take advantage of power. And in fact, it is taking advantage of power to say, I just don't feel like going, so I'm not going to go, and you can't make me because nobody else goes. That kind of stuff just accumulates.
Well, and if there's no accountability by the board, the committee that was supposed to be, this advisory board was supposed to be meeting for public accountability with taxpayer funds, public funds, how could they know, it almost seems like it was a direct attempt to not know that there was illegal fundraising going on, just within this group, and solicitation of donations, just as there was with the Sister City Committee. If they don't meet, they can ignore all that, right?
Yeah.
They can pretend it's not going on.
Right. They don't have to face it on a
monthly basis. It's just mind-boggling how really rotten and poorly run this city has been for so long. And yet there's this elevation of those in power that they're doing such a fine job on behalf of the taxpayers. I beg to differ. And this is interesting from the desk of the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. This is from the newsletter from the annual meeting February of this year. It says, on behalf of the membership of the Little Falls Area Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber Board met with the newly elected Mayor Greg Zilka in January, asking that the City Council address the following issues. We support the hiring of a full-time administrator to oversee the day-to-day operations of the city, supervise staff, advise the City Council, and ensure that long-range plans are being addressed. Revise the current sign ordinance to be business-friendly and to facilitate safe streets and roadways in town. Hire and train to not only carry out the day-to-day operations of the city, but enable them to be able to respond efficiently to emergency items such as frozen sewer lines and clogged storm drains. Strive to create a culture at City Hall where residents are encouraged to ask questions and seek help with issues pertaining to city government. You see the hypocrisy here, folks? I mean, if we're not laying it out clearly enough, I don't know what we're doing wrong. It's mind-boggling how this city has continued to operate the way that it has. Then, let's get into this. I'll let Theresa read this. I found this recently. American exceptionalism exceptionalism is un-American, and it's written by Bruce Fine, and this is not all of the article, but it's the majority of it that she'll read.
So I'm reading the green.
Just the highlighted parts of all of it.
Yep. American exceptionalism is un-American. The boast betrays ignorance. The boast betrays ignorance of the founding fathers and the tarnished history of the United States. In any event, to overlook faults because other nations are more flawed is juvenile and leads nowhere. American exceptionalism conveys three wrong or empty ideas: that Americans are blessed with morally superior DNA, which immunizes them from the vices or ill humors of human nature; that the history of the United States is morally irreproachable, or that the United States, despite its warts, is less immoral than other wretched nations. The Founding Fathers understood that human nature does not vary based on geography, race, religion, culture, or otherwise. They sculpted a constitution that relied on a separation of powers, checks and balances, and a diffusion of authority to secure individual liberty and the rule of law. James Madison, father of the Constitution, lectured in Federalist 51, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this: you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." That seems to be the tipping point there, controlling itself. Whoops. Sorry folks, my microphone just fell off.
Part of live TV. No, semi-live TV.
I'm going to hold it like this for now rather than interrupt everything. In Federalist 10, Madison acknowledged that without constitutional constraints, mal-government would prevail among Americans. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and that measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. Oh my gosh, that is a picture of how Little Falls conducts business. The Bill of Rights was a vote of no confidence in American exceptionalism to thwart the dangers of government overreaching fine rights. To deny that American history has been regularly punctuated by immorality is to blink at truth. The Constitution protected slavery, which caused Thomas Jefferson to lament, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." Jim Crow, featuring black lynchings, flourished for a century after the Civil War amendments. Blacks were conscripted to fight in World Wars I and II in segregated units. Women were subjugated until the 1960s. The Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 violated freedom of speech and of due process. Indian treaties were flouted with impunity, but that's certainly true. Mormons were persecuted for half a century. Catholics were de facto unelectable to the presidency until John F. Kennedy. Civil War hero and President Ulysses S. Grant described the Mexican-American War as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory. World War I was followed by the A. Mitchell Palmer raids. World War II witnessed concentration camps for 120,000 Japanese Americans. The Vietnam War emblem was the My Lai massacre. Ongoing aimless wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have killed or maimed tens of thousands, and post 9/11 waterboarding, detentions without accusation or trial, the suspension of habeas corpus, spying on Americans without judicial warrants, and threatening lawyers for defending accused terrorists or terrorist organizations are earmarks of tyranny, not liberty. And I think that's it.
And Bruce Fine, of course, was my former attorney, and he tells it really eloquently every time he speaks. And what he doesn't talk about here, but numbers of journalists are starting to talk about a lot, and that is the war on whistleblowers, and that's for another time. But actually, a lot of what Theresa and I have done over the past 4 years is blow the whistle on local government. So we're kind of right in that heap of people that are telling truth to power. I just want to read a little bit out of Bob Passey's really important letter to the editor that he wrote in the Brainerd Dispatch, dated January 20 of 2015. Time for a citizens movement, because a lot of this ties right in. Mm-hmm. We now find ourselves living in a country where the ordinary citizen has very little voice. Don't we know that? Where voting rights are being again restricted to exclude the poor, the isolated, the young, and the newer citizens, and where money controls most of the systems of governance. The media and much of the social discourse. Now we find ourselves living in a growing Big Brother environment of technology, surveillance, our lives monitored and judged in secret. Well, whoever dares to expose what's happening or disturb the profit stream is punished or exiled, where intimidation keeps many from freely speaking out or even assembling. Now we find ourselves in a world of extended empire of capitalism with our economic power to sustain it and bully others who would not comply with our military spread out across the globe with drones, with secret prisons, and even with the exploitation of space as a weapons platform in the offing. We now find ourselves not just a segment of the citizenry, but all ordinary citizens excluded from national decision-making, our livelihoods in jeopardy, our futures mortgaged, and our lives lived to finance war and wealth with our government, more of a conduit to transfer money to the corporate behemoths than to serve the needs of the citizenry or democracy and justice, while we are moved closer and closer to climate catastrophe to avoid any hint of economic dislocation, while others slip beneath the rising oceans. We need a citizens' movement to save ourselves, our democracy, and perhaps even our planet from further degradation. It is time to stand up for the human part of the human race. And I just think that was terribly well written. I've been going to get at this for a long time, but I haven't found time in our previous taping, so I'm going to, again, read some of this incredibly important stuff. This is from an article from Rise Up Times, which is connected to the Women Against Military Madness, which I've been a long-term member of. And it's titled, "The Pentagon is Preparing for Societal Collapse Due to Climate Change." And I remember meeting a number of veterans, actually, they were recent veterans, coming out of the Republican convention down in St. Cloud, and talking to them about what the military knows might happen in our society. I think the veterans are very aware of what the military and our government is planning for. The report finds that in the United States, security threats will consist of unimaginable need for worldwide humanitarian aid and increasing migrations to the U.S. from our neighbors to the south. Scarcity of water, melting glaciers, which currently provide water for millions of people. And it goes on to say Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska each get 70 to 90% of their water from the Ogallala. The Colorado River Basin, the source of water for tens of millions of people, is already experiencing reduced river flow. an increase in tropical hurricane speed strength and increased rainfall amounts, potentially devastating coasts up and down the eastern seaboard, GOM and the Caribbean as the climate continues to bake. Environmentalists and civil libertarians worry that accusations of terrorism, even if completely unfounded, could undermine peaceful political protest. Given this information, the Department of Defense has created the Minerva Initiative. That initiative is a sponsored university-based social science research initiative launched by the Secretary of Defense that focuses on areas of strategic importance to the U.S. national security policy. The NSA PRISM program is motivated in part by fears that environmentally linked disasters could spur anti-government activism. Unilateral changes to the United States military laws formally granted the Pentagon extraordinary powers to intervene in a domestic emergency or civil disturbance. Federal military commanders have the authority in extraordinary emergency circumstances where prior authorization by the President is impossible and duly constituted local authorities are unable to control the situation to engage temporarily in activities that are necessary to quell large-scale, unexpected civil disturbances. Environmental destruction, whether caused by human behavior or cataclysmic megadisasters such as floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, or tsunamis, problems of this scope may overwhelm the capacity of local authorities to respond and may even overtax national militaries, requiring a larger international response. The Army Modernization Strategy described the arrival of new era persistent conflict due to competition for depleting natural resources in overseas markets, fueling future resource wars over our water, food, and energy. The report predicted a resurgence of anti-government and radical ideologies that potentially threaten government stability. U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute warned that a series of domestic crises could provoke large-scale civil unrest, disruptive domestic shock, deployment of weapon of mass destruction, catastrophic natural and human disasters, or pervasive health emergencies coinciding with unforeseen economic collapse, loss of functioning political and legal order, leading to purposeful domestic resistance or insurgency. That year, the Pentagon had begun developing a 20,000 strong troop force who would be on hand to respond to domestic catastrophes and civil unrest. This is just, it goes on and on about the systemic effort to surveil and disrupt peaceful demonstrations linked to Occupy Wall Street. FBI documents confirmed a strategic partnership between the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the private sector designed to produce intelligence on behalf of the corporate security community. Federal agencies functioning as a de facto intelligence arm of Wall Street and America. Domestic surveillance has systematically targeted peaceful environment activists, including anti-fracking activists across the United States, such as Gas Drilling Awareness Coalition, Rising Tide North America, the People's Oil and Gas Collaborative, and Greenpeace. And there's been, it says, I have often suspected that the increase in intelligence, such as spying on American citizens, the crackdown on Occupy Wall Street, and the militarization of our local police forces is no coincidence.
No, absolutely not. There's a big script that is being followed, I think. And there are a few people who can see it from here, and we keep saying, oh, you guys watch out, there's a big script being followed here. And but sometimes I feel like there's a brick wall between the few people who get it and the whole rest of the world.
That's because there is a small percentage of people that care to even take their head out of the sand for a moment
And take a look.
to get it.
I know.
It's easier to ignore things and cling to your cognitive dissonance than deal with it.
Mm.
It's just
The way it works.
it's
Until it all comes to a head.
really a shame.
Yeah.
I just want to make the public aware of an article that was sent to me by a friend about your local legislator, whose name is Ron Krisha. He's being sued by a former associate of his Golden Shovel Agency, LLC. That's the company he owns.
Okay.
So this, I'm going to read in part what's from the Min Post article that was written about this. Blue Stream Prairie, actually, not Min Post, but Blue Stream Prairie. Once upon a time in 2011, Ron Krisha, president and CEO of Golden Shovel Agency, he's also the Little Falls-based Minnesota State Representative from House District 9A, sang the praises of the firm's Director of Strategic Marketing, Mary Whelan, in the now deleted but still cached blog post. Teams will promote revolutionary new web system and innovative social management tool to help organizations save time and money. Little Falls, Minnesota, April 12, 2011, Golden Shovel Agency, this is the post that was put up, a web development firm specializing in online tools for economic and community development, has announced the expansion of its team, naming John Marshall, Vice President of Sales, and Mary Whelan, Director of Strategic Marketing. The agency recently launched 2 new tools to propel organizations into the forefront of economic development. Web System Economic Gateway combines a software as a service subscription model, content management system, and GIS-based site selection tool. Gatekeeper Social Management helps organizations create and engage loyal online communities. Mary Whelan, this gal who's suing him, former employee, subcontractor, whatever she was, writer of a lot of these programs, has over 10 years agency experience in the areas of online marketing, interactive development, web solutions, and social media in the food service, domestic and global education, electronic software, and construction industries. Her career includes agency work for clients such as Adobe, Best Buy, Nestle, General Mills, Dryers, Multifoods, Hormel Foods, Land O'Lakes, the Pillsbury Company, and Bemidji State University's Department of Professional Education. Whelan carries that experience over to the firm's services, solutions, and clients. Our strategically crafted sales and marketing team works collaboratively with our product and business teams to prospect the latest technologies and trends in community development and provide them as web solutions to our clients, said Golden Shovel President Ron Krisha. The goals for our clients are more than just attracting and retaining jobs. It's also about saving time and money for the organizations involved, said Krisha. Economic Gateway and Gatekeeper Social Management are complementary solutions to achieve real integration across websites, mobile and social media tools. Golden Shovel is currently offering complimentary online exposure via its powerful online network. Sometime after that, the business relationship soured, and now Whelan is suing Krisha and Golden Key Agency LLC for $2 million to address claims of alleged damages related to property rights, copyrights, and Krisha and Golden Shovel have returned the favor with a counterclaim alleging damages of their own supposedly caused by Whelan. Whelan started legal action on February 10, 2014. According to Pacer Monitor, the last filing in the case, active in the United States District Court, District of Minnesota, is a January 26, 2015 plaintiff's reply to counterclaim by defendant Mary Whelan. Now, remember, this article was written in February this year, so there may be more of an update since then, but I just wanted the local folks to understand that, number one, Ron Krisha's Golden Shovel Company digs for government gold, so it's an appropriate name, the Golden Shovel. And how they dig for government gold is that they encourage their clients to go for economic development grants and other ways of getting basically
Government.
corporate welfare,
Yeah.
business welfare. That's what his entire company is based on. And it's interesting, that he's being sued at present. When there is more on that issue, I'll bring you an update. Gonna change directions here a little bit. We're going to talk about, I want to talk about, this article is written by this man by the name of Jacob Hornberger. And the reason I want to read this information is because he reflects my sentiments from over a long period of time here. I agree with everything he says, and if I don't, I'm going to let you know as I read this. The title of this article is "The Troops Are Destroying Our Country."
Oh my.
The mindset that's common to United States troops serving overseas is that they're all doing it for America, for us, for our rights and freedoms, for our safety and security. They'll all tell you that they're doing it because they love their country. There's one big problem with that mindset, however. The truth is that the troops, though what they're doing over there, are indirectly destroying our country, our rights and freedoms, our safety and security, and our economic well-being. Ever since 9/11 and even before, the troops have been killing and maiming people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, and elsewhere in the Middle East. The numbers of people killed and maimed reach into the hundreds of thousands. Most of the people killed or maimed just want to rid their lands of the United States troops and the United States bureaucrats, or just happen to be near someone who is being targeted by the troops. All that killing, maiming, torture, humiliation, and destruction has made people in that part of the world angry at the United States. A certain percentage of them have decided to respond with violence in the form of terrorism. And this isn't part of this article, but now I just want to share something that Colleen Rowley said at one of the events that I called, and that is that terrorism is a poor man's war. War is a rich man's terrorism.
Absolutely. Let that sink in for a moment. That's a really...
It's powerful, but it's absolutely
yeah.
true.
Mm-hmm.
Terrorism is a poor man's war. But war is a rich man's terrorism. And we, as the United States, are very guilty of that, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The
Waging
more,
terrorism through war.
yeah. The more people the troops killed and maimed, the greater the number of people within that sector of society who desired to respond with terrorist violence. One might say that the troops, by virtue of what they do over there, have become the greatest terrorist-producing machine in history.
Oh my God.
In the process of keeping us safe from the terrorist threat that the troops have created through their killing and maiming over there, United States officials embarked on a program that destroys the freedom, privacy, and well-being of the American people. Consider the mass surveillance scheme that the NSA has been secretly conducting on the American people ever since 9/11. There's no way to reconcile such a scheme with the principles of a genuinely free society. The NSA secret surveillance scheme is what communist regimes have. Just
and
look
we've
at,
always accused and blamed them.
right. But we're better than that. We're exceptional.
We're exceptional.
Just
And
look at
violence.
North Korea, Cuba, China, and Vietnam. They all spy on their citizens and secretly monitor their activities. And so do we.
And so did we.
And thank goodness for whistleblowers.
And we spy on them as well. I mean, we
That's
spy on
right.
other countries. We're not content to just
We
spy
set
on
the pace
ourselves.
for everybody else.
Yeah.
They're following our examples. Thank God for Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange and John Kiriakou and Thomas
Colleen
Drake
Rowley.
and Colleen Rowley and Susan Lindauer and Jessamine Raddick, and the list goes on and on of whistleblowers that are locked up or have been locked up or are defending people who have had the courage to stand up. They're some of the bravest patriots ever, telling the truth to power. So why does America have a communist-like program here in our country? The NSA will be the first to tell you in order to ferret out the terrorists before they can come and do us harm. Those would be the people who are filled with rage over the killing, maiming, and destroying that the United States troops are engaged in over there. Thus, notice the critical relationship between the troops over there and the NSA's destruction of liberty and privacy at home. Consider the President's Pentagon and CIA extraordinary post-9/11 authority to round up Americans as suspected terrorists, cart them away and to a military dungeon or concentration camp for indefinite detention, torture them, deny them trial by jury, and other procedural guarantees, and even assassinate or execute them, all with immunity and impunity. Once again, these are all features of a communist-run society, not a free society. Once again, the justification is to keep us safe. Safe from what? From the people over there who are angry over there about what our troops are doing over there? The more the troops kill and maim, the angrier the people get. The greater the threat of terrorist retaliation, the greater the need to keep us safe, and the greater the infringements on our freedom and our well-being. The troops have convinced themselves that they're over there killing the people who would otherwise be coming over here to kill us. That's ridiculous. If people wanted to come over here to kill us, they could easily circumvent the troops and come over here and kill us. The fact is that ever since 9/11 and even before, the troops that they're killing, torturing, maiming, and destroying have been creating the very danger that U.S. officials have been using to destroy our freedom and well-being at home.
Oh, that's a very brave article to have written.
It is.
Considering that the American temperament about the troops, our mood, the national mood is that somehow we should all be falling at their feet and thanking them for, I don't know, something. I really don't get it myself. And I'm going to say again, as I've said before, and I know Robin will agree with me, neither one of us is anti-soldier, but we are very much anti-military. It's the military who plants the idea in the soldiers' minds, and by the way, also in civilian minds, that the soldiers are somehow incredible heroes, even when that isn't justified by what the troops are actually doing. So,
Well, and I'm going to take just a moment here to, earring fell off.
oh dear,
Take that one off.
we'll have to crawl under the desk a little.
I'm going to be writing a letter to the editor, and I'm also going to be talking, hopefully during our next discussion. There just was too much to get at here, not time enough to address this fully, but I want to share with the locals that the shadow drones that Camp Ripley trains on are indeed used for target acquisition, used in conjunction with the bigger Reaper drone, the Predator drone, and the Global Hawk that are used to assassinate people illegally. And there's even more interesting than that. The shadow drones are much cheaper to operate, take much less military crews to operate them, and they can be and are effectively weaponized and can be used to assassinate people, blow up things on the ground, and this has been happening with those shadow drones since I believe it's 2010 or 11. So they're weaponized. And whether the ones out at Camp Ripley are weaponized when they're training isn't relevant. The fact is that our Army has gone so far to create a harness that the bomb, and it's a smaller bomb because these are smaller drones, but they can carry a bomb with this new thing that they added to hold the bomb. They have adjusted the wing somehow to make them fly longer, fly better. They've also developed a helicopter type of mechanism that can affix to the shadow so that it doesn't have to go off the launch catapult system that they've been using. And the reason that our government and our military is changing the shadow to become a smaller killer drone is because, number one, military dollars have been slashed because of federal budget cutbacks, and they're cheaper to operate, doesn't take as many man hours to operate them, and there, I guess, have been instances in the research that I've done where if the shadows had been weaponized at that time, they wouldn't have missed the target. Evidently, the time between the target acquisition when it's given to the Predator drones and they aren't necessarily in the close proximity, they've lost opportunity to kill some of the people they were targeting.
Oh, what a shame.
What a shame. Yeah. So there's another blog written by Hornberger that also I agree with everything that he writes in here, and if not, I'll tell you as I'm reading this. This one states, why support the troops? And it's written September 21st, it's actually my birthday, folks, of 2012. One of the most fascinating phenomena of our time is the extreme reverence that the American people have been taught to have for the military. Exactly what you just stated, the extreme veneration.
Yeah.
Wherever you go, airports, sports events, church, there's a godlike worship of the military. Every time I see this reverence for the military being expressed, I wonder if the people ever give any thought to what exactly the troops are doing. No one seems to ask that question. It just doesn't seem to matter. The assumption is that whatever the troops are doing, they're protecting our rights and freedoms. As one sports broadcaster I recently heard put it, we wouldn't be here playing this game if it weren't for the troops. Let's give them credit for the sports games too. Everything. There is at least one big problem with this phenomenon, however. The troops are engaged in actions that are harmful to the American people, including most of the people who have a reverential attitude toward them. It seems to me that when people are doing the right thing, they are entitled to be supported, but when they're engaged in wrongful or harmful conduct, then they shouldn't be supported. Why should the military be exempt from normal moral and ethical principles?
Absolutely.
Because like what Bruce Fine says, war, any form of war, makes what is normally considered murder legal.
Legal. And apparently praiseworthy.
Right. What was it that produced the anger and rage that brought on 9/11? Was it the hatred for America's freedoms and values as a U.S. official maintains? Or was it anger and rage arising from what the troops and other U.S. officials were doing to people in the months and years leading up to 9/11? That obviously gets into United States foreign policy, an area that makes many people who support the troops very uncomfortable. Why? Because if they conclude that the troops are doing things to people overseas that are producing the anti-American anger and rage that culminates in anti-American terrorism, then that presents a problem for them. It would be that cognitive dissonance we talked about. How do they, in good conscience, continue supporting the people who are causing their problems? Yet the reality is that troops are doing things to people overseas that are making people angry at the United States. Examples include the invasions and occupations of Iraq, Afghanistan, and ever-increasing drone assassinations. As everyone knows, such actions have succeeded in killing and maiming hundreds of thousands of people, including women and children. On top of that has been the torture and the kidnappings, Gitmo, the supported brutal dictatorships in the Israeli government, the United States troops on Islamic holy lands, the illegal no-fly zone over Iraq, the sanctions that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children, and the current sanctions on Iran. It's the troops who enforce many of those programs. Now, it might be said that the troops aren't at fault because they're just following orders. Even if that's true, is that any reason to support them? For one thing, no one forced them to join an organization that would require them to do whatever they were ordered to do. They did that on their own volition. Moreover, even when they're following orders, the fact remains that what they're doing is nonetheless counterproductive to the best interests of the American people. That is, for those of us who want normally functioning society, rather than an aberrant post-9/11 society in which we now live, what the troops are doing is an obstacle to the achievement of our goal, whether they are doing it willingly or simply on orders of their commanders. But for the people who are sick and tired of all this, for them it's necessary to confront the root causes of America's problems. And like it or not, one of the root causes of America's woes in the United States military establishment and the entire national security state, not only with respect to anti-American anger and the hatred they produce by their actions overseas, but also by contributing to the out-of-control spending and debt that has now constituted a grave threat to the economic well-being of our nation. Why would anyone want to support people who are doing things that are detrimental to us and our country?
You know, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, I wish we could go back to the good old days. It's completely false nostalgia, but there's this idea that everything was just hunky-dory back in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s. Reality doesn't bear that out.
Right.
You know, there are many things that we've improved beyond since then, but it not only is this fallacy kind of a driving force for people, but there are some people who seem to think that we can kill, rape, and maim and torture our way back to that. All we have to do is kill some more people and we can get back to that. When in fact, every time we kill, we're getting further from anybody's best hope for the country, nostalgic or not. So we need to think a little more deeply. Just take 10 seconds longer to think things through when these issues come up in your head.
There's another really interesting article that absolutely backs up or correlates with what this other writer, this Hornsberger, just wrote. And the title of this article is on Alternate. It's the number one threat to peace in the world is, guess who? The United States. Much of the rest of the world thinks Iran has a right to enrich the uranium, which is at the heart of the dispute between the United States and Israel and Iran. More importantly, the rest of the globe thinks the United States is the biggest threat to peace. In early 2014, Gallup International, WIN, released its annual global survey based on research conducted the previous year. The most striking statistic was that 24% of the people around the world believe that the United States poses the greatest threat to peace.
What percentage again?
24%.
Wow, that's
Only 5% of those surveyed thought Iran was a threat to world peace. The numbers are based on interviews with 1,000 people in 65 different nations. Since 1945, the United States government has meddled, intervened, overthrown, and or invaded the governments of dozens of foreign countries. United States actions have created the arc of violence and chaos stretching from Latin America to the Middle East and beyond. 54% of Russians told the pollsters that the United States is the biggest threat to global peace. More than half of Russians. No wonder Russians view the United States unfavorably. Nor is it surprising that the rest of the world, which witnessed the United States invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, continues to see the U.S. as a threat to peace. The world will continue to see the United States as a threat as long as it continues its aggressive interventionism around the globe.
So once again, there was the good old days when everybody loved America, never actually existed. But even if some people once had a better opinion of us than they have now, it's all gone downhill since then, and will continue to do so as long as we continue to behave so badly.
And I'm not going to take time to read this whole thing, but this is from an article called United States Military Teaches Protesters Are Low-Level Terrorists.
Wow, wait a minute. They teach the world that we're low-level terrorists.
United States military teaches protesters that are low-level terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Protesters. According to the ACLU letter, the DoD's annual Level 1 anti-terrorism awareness training for 2009 tells department personnel that certain First Amendment protected activity may amount to low-level terrorism.
Good.
Teaching employees that dissent on issues of public concern is something to be feared rather than encouraged is a dangerously counterproductive use of scarce security resources, making us less safe as a democracy, the ACLU letter to the Pentagon said. DoD employees cannot accomplish their mission of protecting our nation and its values unless they understand that those values encompass the right to criticize our government through protest activities. It's imperative that they are taught the difference between political, religious, or social activism and terrorism. Peaceful protest is not terrorist activity. It is protected by the First Amendment and is one of the cornerstones of our democratic society, the ACLU said. The fact that the views espoused may be unpopular or may be critical of the government is hardly a reason to treat engaging in dissent as suspected activity.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
All right. This is from Tom Hartman's blog, or his news opinion debate, dated March 30th of 2015, so just recently here. And it's titled, Why the House of Representatives Doesn't Represent Americans. One of the really weird ironies of politics these days is the huge divergence between what the American people actually want and what the radical right-wingers in Washington actually do. Everyday Americans overwhelmingly support some of the most liberal policies around. 71% of all Americans support giving all students access to debt-free college education. 70% support expanding Social Security. 71%, a massive infrastructure spending program aimed at rebuilding outbroken roads and bridges and putting people back to work. 59% support raising taxes on the wealthy so that millionaires pay the same amount in taxes as they did during the Reagan administrations. 77% of Americans support giving every American child free pre-education, pre-K education. 58% of Americans support breaking up the big banks. 59% meanwhile support a basic guaranteed minimum income, while still a higher percentage, 70%, support the creation of a Green New Deal that would see the government invest hundreds of millions of dollars in renewable energy. Why in our democracy is the will of the people not being heard? The answer is both simple and tragic. We no longer actually live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. Thanks to the Supreme Court's long war against campaign finance law, the billionaires and economic royalists now have more control over our political system than they have in almost a century. This isn't opinion. It's objective and quantifiable fact.
Quantifiable fact. And just listening to all of this, I'm thinking, gosh, there's a tendency to feel all alone if you've got extremely liberal views, or even mildly liberal views. But it turns out that the whole country's with you. We're just not represented by anyone who's going to take those ideas and make good use of them. So, and it's true. This country is being run by a few people who are lining their pockets, and the rest of us can just go take a flying leap.
This is from an article titled Suicide in the Military, Army NIH-funded study points to risk and protective factors. It's dated March 3rd, 2014. Findings from the Army study to assess risk and resilience in service members include the rise in suicide deaths from 2004 to 2009 occurred not only in concurrently and previously deployed soldiers, but also among soldiers never deployed. Nearly half of soldiers who reported suicide attempts indicated that their first attempt was prior to enlistment. And soldiers reported higher rates of certain mental disorders than civilians, including attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD, intermittent explosive disorder, recurrent episodes of extreme anger and violence, and substance use disorder.
So, in other words, people who are going into the military are already kind of loaded for bear.
Correct.
They're already mentally ill.
Well, they're allowing people that have serious potential to be to be affected by war trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Additionally, the study identified a correlation between demotion and suicide risk. Soldiers who had been demoted in the past 2 years experienced increased suicide risk compared to those without such demotions. There was also increased risk in soldiers without at least a high school diploma or a GED certificate compared to soldiers with similar or higher degrees. The data suggests that being male, white, or a junior enlisted rank put individuals at the highest risk of suicide.
So the military is starting with vulnerable people and making them even sicker.
Right.
It would seem. And
Now,
these are our sons and daughters.
I want to call attention to something that a lot of local people may not be aware of. Some of our friends in the peace movement and with Veterans of Peace, Women Against Military Madness, Code Pink, and a number of other organizations held an event at the Nevada nuclear test site in Creech Air Force Base. And it was, I'll read some from this article, September 21st, the United Nations International Day of Peace. After an interfaith liturgy at 10 o'clock, 6 men and 4 women were arrested at the Nevada National Security Site, which is 65 miles from Las Vegas. Prayer activists continue to visit the NNSS, formerly called Nevada Test Site, annually in order to work on a spiritual level for the end of ongoing nuclear violence at this solitary United States nuclear weapons proving ground and site of weekly low-level nuclear waste dumping. Since 1997, subcritical nuclear weapons testing has occurred regularly at the NNSS. The next morning, September 22nd, 18 miles away, At Creech Air Force Base, 4 people were arrested at the end of a 30-minute meditation for peace. 20 peace and justice advocates were praying for nonviolence and social justice. Goes on to name the individuals that were given citations from Clark County charged with blocking a roadway and given a November 3rd arraignment date. They were then released across the United States Highway 95 with a warm reception from the remaining demonstrators. Creech Air Force Base is the command center for United States remotely piloted aircraft drone warfare and the location of the Central Intelligence Agency's Squadron 17 secret assassination team. The demonstrators had formed 2 groups, 11 people who stayed on the side of the street and the remaining 9 stayed in the road, blocking traffic along and with a police vehicle at Metro Police Station for safety's sake. They came there to present and stop that military base from operation that day in opposition to the illegal drone assassinations that the United States is currently guilty of and has been doing for a long period of time already.
And you do understand that this is the place where the drones are operated. It may be flying thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away over other people's countries, but it's all being operated out of this Nevada site.
We're going to finish up. I'm going to let Theresa read this. This is what the people that stepped over the line on Creech Air Force Base, the letter that they wrote it's titled "To Our Brothers and Sisters, Sons and Daughters at Creech Air Force Base." And if you just read all of that and all of that,
Okay.
and then I think there's one,
Okay.
that's the letter from these people who are there protesting.
To our brothers and sisters, sons and daughters at Creech Air Force Base. This week, veterans of the U.S. wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan are arriving in Nevada to join protests outside Creech Air Force Base against drone warfare. We are not protesting against you, the airmen and women who are drone operators and support personnel. We are reaching out to you because we understand the position that you are in. We were once in that position ourselves, some of us quite recently. We know what it feels like to be caught up in strange and brutal wars not of our own making and not clearly in the interests of our nation. We want to share some of our hard-won truths to offer you our support. We know that drone operators and support personnel have a tough job. We understand that you are not playing video games, but rather engaging in life and death situations on a daily basis. You are not targeted and don't have to worry about being killed and wounded, but you are human beings with feelings who suffer nonetheless. You have a conscience too. It is not normal or healthy for human beings to kill other human beings. Many veterans continue to suffer from PTSD and moral injury for the rest of their lives. The suicide rate for active duty GIs and veterans is extremely high. No matter how you spin it, your job involves killing other human beings, thousands of miles away, who are not threatening you. No doubt you want to know who those people are. According to recent independent research, the identity of only 1 out of 28 victims of drone strikes is known beforehand. 1 out of 28. Though officials deny it, the majority of those killed by drones are civilians. As veterans who have served in many wars and on many military bases, we have been educating ourselves about what goes on at Creech Air Force Base. In 2005, Creech secretly became the first U.S. base in the country to carry out remotely controlled assassinations using the MQ-1 Predator drones.